My name is Christiana Freitas. I'm an associate professor at University of Brasilia here in Brazil. I was invited here today to talk about crowd law practices and how can crowd law collaborate for digital transformation in the legislative power. So I've been studying crowd law practices for some time now, for a few years, and basically, what crowd law is about is crowdsourcing for public policies and laws. So the idea is to promote and develop tools for sharing information with the crowd, with citizens, so they can be nearer from the decision-making policy processes. So here are some examples. Shahidi from Kenya. It's an open platform that was developed in 2008. The participatory budgeting that's from Brazil, started in the 80s, and now it's replicated all over the world. So we have Russia, Lithuania, United States, all of them are using our initiative, this model. And we have other ones that are specifically for parliaments. So crowd law in a broad sense is about crowdsourcing for public policies and laws, but we are now here going to focus on crowd law specifically for the legislative power. So what do all these initiatives have in common? Transparency, that's one of a precondition, and it's very important. You have to have transparency in the process of lawmaking. You have to have accountability. Collaboration is a key word as well. So you have to come up with solutions between governors and citizens. The idea is to allow the bottom-up flow of information. So in doing that, we have public engagement, different groups included in the decision-making processes. And it's kind of a premise when we talk about crowd law, that diverse participation leads to better governance tools, to better decisions, to better policies. So we could say that the main goal of crowd law practices is to co-create solutions for public problems. So when we started thinking of crowd law, that was in 2014, a research team led by Beth Novak started to think about how could we define crowd law? Would it be an agenda? Would it be a concept? And then this group of researchers started writing and implementing and researching about these initiatives that already existed in the world. So we can say that crowd law is crowdsourcing ideas for governments to find solutions to public problems. Beth Novak wrote in 2018 kind of a concept, and crowd law can be understood as the way that we're going to manage city councils at the local level and how parliaments at the regional and national level are turning to technology to engage with citizens at every stage of the law and policy-making process. So why speak of crowd law? What is it? Why is it interesting? Why is it innovative? And why? Because it keeps public administration informed about citizens' demands and the diversity of perspectives and knowledge regarding a specific problem. It gives legitimacy and transparency to governors' actions because it works with the non-systematized knowledge that we find in the crowd, we find in citizens, we find in a diversity of groups that exist in society and that they are not necessarily in public institutions. So why talk about crowd law? Because it increases the public value of government's decisions and outputs. And last but not least, and we will talk about that further on, it stimulates alliances and partnerships for economic development. And I will give you an example of that. So what do we need to make crowd law work? There are 4 basic preconditions. We have to have public entrepreneurship, and that means that we have to have public managers willing to change, having this political will to change. We have to have digital tools for deliberation. It seems something quite obvious for some countries and for some cities, but not always. It's not always the case here in Brazil and in other countries. We have to have tools that are accessible, that are easy to use, and we have to work on that. Another precondition, a very important one, is power sharing. It means that we have to hand the power from governors to citizens. It means that civic engagement can generate better policies and economic development because we are accessing that non-systematized knowledge that several political social groups in society have. So, and maybe the most important one of all of these four assumptions is institutional design. We need to redesign and reinvent the flow and the organizational culture of public institutions. We need to think of them in a more horizontal way, in a more open way, with less bureaucracy. That's a given, everybody knows that. We have to have a more open organizational culture to innovation and change, and we need to recognize what I meant when I talked about non-systematized knowledge. We have to understand that all the information cannot be only in public institution, cannot be only in the experts' minds. Not all the information we need lies on public institutions. So there is knowledge outside the box. There is knowledge outside the public institutions, the organizations from governments. So we need to reach out for this collective intelligence, and that is a very important concept that we work with. We have to access this collective intelligence of different groups and include it into lawmaking processes. We do not need opinions. Social media is full of them. What we really need is expertise to solve public problems. How do we do that? First of all, creating the initiatives of Crowdlaw that connect public institutions to powerful sources of collective intelligence, engaging the public at each stage of the legislative process. That means even when we're thinking of a draft bill, we can incorporate citizens like a Democracia does, like a Cidadania does as well. Gather citizen inputs. It's important to do that so we can have public policies in the future that will incorporate these inputs. So gathering citizens' inputs have to be a first part of the process. And these inputs must be or become government's outputs in the future. So it's improving the bottom-up flow of information. It's identifying problems at scale because we have the digital tools to do that, and solving them as well. So that's the basics of Crowdlaw, something like concepts and basic ideas. I'm now going to share with you some results of a research we're developing for some years now. We mapped, first of all, in the beginning, we mapped all the digital democratic innovations in Latin America and the Caribbean. We found in 2018, 526 of them. Now they're already in 980. So we have a lot of digital democratic innovation going on in 18 countries from this region. But when we filter that and try to find the Crowdlaw practices, or the practices that are using crowdsourcing for public policies and laws, we can find that this number is really reduced. When we filter a bit more and think of Crowdlaw for parliaments, we have this result that I'm presenting to you now. Almost half of the initiatives are from Brazil, and the other ones are divided into 5 other countries. So not all of the countries have Crowdlaw practices, and these numbers are really small. So how can we increase the percentage of initiatives, the percentage of parliaments who are willing to work with Crowdlaw practices, are willing to change in a way, the way that laws are made? So here in Brazil, we have several of them: Cidade Democrática, GovLab. GovLab is a company, we'll talk about that later on. And several others that already have results and are very, very effective. One example, it's a very clear example for Brazilians because it exists for 10 years now. Maybe people from other countries still never heard of it. A Democracia is an open platform from the Chamber of Deputies to co-create draft bills, co-create laws. So the idea is to put in practice what Crowdlaw is about. So one of the most famous examples of the Democracia was the Marco Civil da Internet, or our Internet Regulation Law. And it was all discussed very much discussed for a long period, for several months, discussed in this virtual community on e-democracia. And what is interesting about it is that all interest groups were represented in this virtual community and discussed all their interests, all their goals, what did they really want with internet regulation in Brazil. So telecommunication companies worked on that, representatives from civil society, government representatives. So it was very diverse and interesting, and that is really what Crowdlaw is about. E-Cidadania is a platform from the Senate, and it has the same logic of a democracy, only works with other tools. One of these tools is this one, Ideia Legislativa, or legislative idea. And the idea is that citizens can put in there whatever they want, post whatever they want, and suggest new ideas, new draft bills for the parliament. So here they are displaying that they already had 27 ideas that were transformed in bills. And that doesn't happen only in Brazil. So Lawmaker is an initiative in the United States from a coder and his partner. They were tired of hearing hearing the same speech all over again every time from the same people, and they decided to build this platform for citizens to crowdsource laws. Well, so we've seen two examples of initiatives that are from the government initiatives. This Lawmaker in the United States is an example of civil society initiative with citizens, and Mudamos is another one that was designed by the Institute of Technology and Society in Rio. Mudamos is an app that people can vote on draft bills, and when you put your draft bill in this app, you scale it up, so you can have the significant amount of people supporting that draft bill so it can become a bill. So these are some examples of Crowdlaw from civil society, from government. And now I will give my last example that shows how companies and governments can work together. So we have the case of the GovTech network. It's a network that with a lot of countries joining in. And we have, of course, they work with Crowdlaw. They work with several topics and goals that are really urgent to solve public problems that really need solving. And we have today around 1,500 startups, or half of the companies that join the network, focusing on using digital resources to change the public sector. So these are the three main topics of interest of the companies. 28% of them wants to solve public management problems, issues. 17% wants to solve education issues, and 11% are related to the health sector. That will probably increase with the pandemic crisis. We've seen a lot of innovation focusing on solving public problems, local problems, sometimes very specific ones that innovation can really work it out. So GovLab is an example of a company working with the public sector, Facilite a Prova Digital, Gov. So what all this mean? What can we conclude of all these observations of Crowdlaw practices? We really observed with results from research, with cases that we studied, that Crowdlaw can foster several positive elements in public administration that will increase public value. So a Crowdlaw can foster well-informed public administration. It gives legitimacy to some government's actions. Diversity of knowledge and expertise regarding a specific problem, which is the use of collective intelligence, can lead to a better governance. And as we've seen, we have alliances between companies and governments, and these alliances can also foster economic development, income generation, more jobs, and really change structures that are hierarchical, that are not very flexible, and we really need to change that so we can have a legislative power that is really strong. So for more information on all of this that I told you on Crowdlaw and collective intelligence, there is the mapping that the GovLab in NYU did with all the Crowdlaw initiatives we found. There's also this report that the GovLab did with Nesta. I was part of the advisory board. We analyzed several cases using collective intelligence to solve public problems. So we have a playbook, lots of videos and interviews and podcasts that you can access to see it. Another report is Crowdlaw for Congress. I think many of you will be interested in. And in there are videos, case studies, practical strategies, showing how can legislators use technology to engage with the public and improve lawmaking, but not only legislators, also companies and all the actors that are interested in this ecosystem that wants to implement changes and wants to implement crowd law for democracy or for even better efficiency in the legislative power. Thank you very much.